So to begin, let's take a snapshot of this heading here so we have something to work against in our template. In a previous step, what I did was I merged all the layers into one so we can easily copy sections from it. So I'm going to do that here. I'll hit Tab to open up the toolbars. I'll select the rectangular marquee tool, and then I'll create an outline around this heading. We'll copy it. We'll create a new document. The size will be automatically set. I'll paste it in, and I'm going to save this for the web. We'll save this, and I'll call this sliderheading.png, and I'm going to save it in the same location as our index.html file. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, you can just copy this image by going to your resource pack directory and going to the Part 1 Steps folder and copying over 09 sliderheading.png.step and just rename it sliderheading.png in your folder, like so. Now let's replace the image that we're using as a design reference inside of our web page with the new one. So I'll go back to our code, and down here in our image, we'll change this title to slider heading, and we'll save it and jump back to the browser and refresh. Okay, so here we have our heading. So our first step is to figure out what HTML element this should be. If we go back to our design, we talked a little bit about what this might be earlier. It seems like it could either be a heading 1 for the entire page, or it could be a series of heading 2s inside of multiple slides in this slider. Because we don't really have a ton of information about which it should be, let's just pick. So I'm going to go with a heading 2 at this point. Let's jump back to our code, and let's add it in right underneath here. So it's H2 more than just a company. We'll save this. And let's jump back to our browser and refresh. So at this point, we're running into an interesting issue, which is that we've already styled our H2 elements. So to get it to look like this, we're going to have to roll back some of those changes by overriding them in our CSS. For example, our default H2 is now all caps, but our new heading has just the first letter uppercased. It also looks like it could be a little thicker, which means that we'd be overriding the font weight. The spacing is also thinner, so we'd be overriding the letter spacing property. And the color is different, so we'd be overriding the color as well. So let's take this approach and see what we need to do in our code in order to get this heading aligned with this one. So let's play with this in the browser using the CSS styles that we know. So I'll inspect this element, and then we'll edit the element style here. So the first thing we can do is change the alignment to bring it under our image to make it easier to compare them. So we'll set the text align, which we've used before, to left to override the center alignment. Next, let's bring this back to its lowercase original by using text transform. Now remember, before we used uppercase. In this case, we're going to use none. Okay, so that's getting it a little bit closer. Let's change the size of this font, which, as we mentioned before, is really just matching the vertical size of the text. So then we know how much space to add in between the letters. So let's do a couple of measurements to figure out what we might need to do to increase this to the right size. If I measure the M in the heading, that's likely the tallest possible letter, and it looks like it's 34 pixels tall. If we measure our existing heading 2, let's do that here with this M, it's 27. So 32 minus 27 is going to be 5 pixels. So let's start by adding 5 pixels to the current height. So the current height is 34 pixels, so let's make it 39. So that looks a little closer, but it doesn't seem quite right. I'm going to do another measurement just to see how close we got. So this M, again, is about 34. So we are going to measure this at 31. So we're still going to have to add some. What I'm going to do is throw out a couple of numbers. I'll start at 42, which is 3 pixels bigger. Still seems like it should be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go 44. Let's try 46. Okay, so somewhere between 44 and 46 seems right. Let's do 45. Let's do another measurement to see if we're getting the font size right. Okay, that's about right. Now the reason why this is hard is because font sizes usually include some white space in addition to the actual size of the font. So as we hover over this H2 down here, you can see the blue outline of the actual text. And if we look underneath that M here, there's some space between the bottom of the M and the edge of the element. That's because there are other elements that stretch below that point, like the J here or the P here. So the measurement of the biggest letter isn't necessarily going to be the size of the font, but it will at least get us in the ballpark. All right, next, the thickness of the letters looks like it might be a little different. Let's try one thickness up to see if that changes anything. So again, that's font weight. So I'm going to go down here. We'll change font weight. So if you remember from before, the font weight is bumping up at 400. It's possible that if we had other fonts installed on our system, we would get a variation between the 100 and the 400 point. But at least on this computer, a 200 and 300 weight are going to be no different than the 100 weight. Now it's getting a little hard to tell how exact we're getting with the thickness because the negative color scheme here, that is dark on the background, light on the foreground, means that it could be tricking our eyes, making us think that these letters are maybe thicker or thinner than they actually are. So to test this out quickly, we can add a dark background to this element and then remove it later when we put it inside of an element that already has a dark background. So I'm going to use the program SIP in order to get a color from this heading so we can kind of match it up. That will copy the hexadecimal value of the color to the clipboard. And then I'm going to change the background color down here in our styles. So we'll set background color, and then I'll paste in the hexadecimal value. I'll hit enter. And now let's change the color of the text, which we've done before with the color attribute. We'll change it to white. So at this point, it looks like the lettering is a little bit too thick for what's up there. So I'm going to roll that back down here to 100. And now I think the only thing that's left is to adjust the letter spacing, because now we have too much space between the letters. So we can scroll down here to see what the current letter spacing is. It's set to 3 pixels. So let's start by setting it to 0 to reset it. So letter spacing, 0 pixels. Okay, that looks about right. I think we can drop the font size down by 1 pixel. Let's give that a shot. All right, that seems pretty dang close.